Welcome back. Welcome back. I know this is a late night video. I wanted to get this one in. It's been on my mind. Just really want to address some issues here. So this video is going to be about landlords and tenants being concise, being clear, and opening up the line of communication. So first and foremost, I want to speak to the tenants. So tenants, please understand that if you went into this agreement with your landlord for your lease, your lease is based on your credit worthiness. It was based on your background. It was based on, your agreement with your landlord of what you was going to pay. Whether if it was a month ago, whether if it was 10 months ago, you agreed to those terms. So if you are still working because your company or your job is an essential business, please just pay your rent. I mean, if you're still having income coming in, just pay your rent. There's no reason for you to want to take advantage of a pandemic or take advantage of a situation just to not pay your bills. That's not really being a responsible individual. Is not being a responsible person who agreed to a leasing term and contract. So you want to live up to your agreement, just like you want your landlord to live up to his or her agreement as well. Now, if your job is not an essential business and your job did shut down, and unfortunately right now you're not employed, then I do understand. But you need to communicate that with your landlord. You can't take the attitude as if, well, my landlord knows what's going on, so what's there to talk about? There's a lot to talk about because you're still bonded into this lease agreement. So opening up the door of communication, being clear, being concise, to have that conversation with your landlord, him or her is well deserving of having that conversation. Please pick up the phone, have a conversation with your landlord, try to work it out. Especially if you are a good paying tenant and you've been on time, and this pandemic has put you back a little bit. I'm sure your landlord would be understanding, and your landlord will have a system and play and something in process to help you. But if you've been a delinquent tenant and you've been delinquent before the pandemic, please don't use this pandemic as an excuse of why you haven't paid your rent in the last 3 to 4 months. The pandemic has nothing to do with your rental payment, your rental history, or who you were as a tenant. So please don't use that for that. I mean, it's not fair to your landlord, and I'm gonna get on the landlords about their responsibilities as well. But come on, tenants, if you ain't been paying, don't use this and say this is the reason why because you knew this was coming or you're having a hardship. If you've been 3-4 months behind, then you just wasn't trying to pay, period. My landlords out there, come on. I mean, we got to have some compassion out there for our good paying tenants. Landlords, if you have a tenant that's been on time every month like clockwork, and because of the pandemic, something, set them back, maybe their job wasn't a essential job and they've been laid off, try to work with the tenant the best of your ability. Work out maybe a, partial payment to vacate the property within the next 60 days, sit down and talk to them, maybe waive some late fees. If you got a good tenant, work with them. There's nothing wrong working. If this tenant has been loyal, faithful, and paying on time, you got to work it out with them. Now, if you have a tenant who hasn't been paying and has been delinquent, well, guess what? I mean, you should have been started your eviction process. If you have a tenant that's been delinquent 3-4 months, 2-3 months before the pandemic happened, your eviction process should have already been in effect. So if you dragged your feet on that and now you're upset because now you're in a pandemic and you're really not getting rent, you can't be mad at something that you already knew that your tenant was doing. So, as a landlord, we got to be on our game as well. And make sure you file the paperwork properly, because when you file that paperwork and you follow through, it gives the next landlord something to look at because that's on the tenant's record. So when we do our background pulls and our landlord and tenant eviction pulls, we can see who's been back and forth through landlord and tenant courts. So, but if you don't follow through all the way, sometimes those evictions get taken off. And then, you're just pushing the next problem to the next landlord. So please, let's do the proper paperwork. Let's try to work this thing out. Communication is the key. clarity of communication. Tenants, please don't think that the landlord should have had savings or the government is bailing them out. The government does not have anything set in stone that I'm aware of that's given anything to landlords for any type of stipend or any type of bailout. Yes, they've been talking about for small businesses, but every landlord business doesn't qualify for that small business stipend and cushion, and they may not want that loan. They got to pay that loan back. So why should they have to take that loan? Right? So just like the tenant can say, well, the landlord should have savings, the landlord can say that the tenant should have savings as well. But that's neither here or there. At this point, we in it. So we have to make the best of it by communicating, being clear, set up a plan of action so we can move forward to get through this. I mean, there's a lot of options out there. If you got a tenant that, can't pay, landlords, you can always, work out a deal where, hey, after this is over, instead of you trying to catch up, just vacate the property, or if the landlord excuses the late fees, tenant, pay your rent. I mean, because eventually at the end of the day, you're going to be in the debt for the rent. Most leases show you what your annual total lease payment is for the year. So you're still locked into that number. And if the landlord does his due diligence, whether if you stay, whether if you pay, whether if you go, that final dollar amount can be placed upon you as a lien in a judgment. So, and if you're a tenant that's just temporarily being a tenant and you're trying to buy a home, that will come up and play a major effect of you buying a house if that lien in judgment pops up that you have to owe this money. So let's work it out. You know what I mean? Let's sit down, let's talk it through. Let's try to put a plan in order and see things together. The biggest thing is communication and clarity. Don't assume that your landlord knows or should know. Don't assume that your tenant knows or should know. Pick up the phone, have a communication, work it out. Be transparent. Like I say all the time, truth is proof.